The Fourth Age, the Age of Hateful Peace. With Tethlis's death, a time of relative peace came between the realms of Ulthuan and Naggaroth. In Naggaroth, the survivors of Tethlis's war brooded over their defeat. The fleet commanders, willing to dare the High Elf patrols to the east, were few, and raiding ships slipped away and returned as sole hunters, unable to gather in great strength and repeat the mighty invasions of the past. Wary of any threat that might prove the fatal blow to their wounded pride and lead to rebellion, the Witch King turned all his resources to consolidating the strength of Naggaroth. At Malekith's command, the defences of the great cities were reinforced and raised even higher than before. Yet, for all his intent upon rebuilding the power of the Dark Elves, Malekith never truly turned his gaze from Ulthuan. As time passed, the Witch King sensed a growing weakness in the hearts of the High Elves, a softening of their souls as generations passed and the bloody battles of the past slipped from living memory. This was a failing the Witch King sought to exploit, but not through outright war, for his own armies needed time to husband their strength. At Morathi's suggestion, Malekith heaped luxuries upon the most dedicated followers of the Dark Elves' gods. From amongst the ranks of these fervent worshippers, the most devoted were sent to learn the arts of subterfuge, sabotage, and murder from the assassins of Cain. When ready, these agents travelled one at a time by hidden routes to the shores of Ulthuan. They blended in with the High Elves and assumed normal lives as carpenters and smiths, farmers and poets. All the while, they spread their poisonous beliefs, and the ancient cults of pleasure grew again. By the time the Phoenix Crown passed from Belcorhadris to Aethys, the heart of Ulthuan harboured a dark canker. Malekith wanes. Even as the Dark Elf presence in Ulthuan strengthened, Malekith faded. Unbeknownst to the Witch King, the same ennui that had beset his hated cousins had now wormed its way into his own black heart. He believed himself merely to be waiting for his plans to come to fruition, biding his time until the opportune moment. The truth was that Malekith, master of deception, deceived only himself. His body was immortal, but his soul was weary. Without the continual challenge of Ulthuan's armies and the provocation of its upstart rulers, his spirit had dulled. As was ever the case, that which was not clear to the Witch King shone darkly to the eyes of his mother. Morathi watched with mounting bitterness as Malekith withdrew from the world. She sacrificed daily to Cain so that he might grant Malekith fresh vigor. When this did not work, she instigated rebellion in the northern city of Har-Kaldra in the hope that it would provoke her son to action. When news of the revolt reached Malekith, he flew into a splendid rage and obliterated the rebellious citadel and all within its walls. For a time, Morathi rejoiced, as it seemed that Malekith's former vigor had returned to him. Alas, this resurgence proved to be temporary. In response, Morathi's own mood darkened further, but things were soon to get worse. A year after the ruin of Har-Kaldra, a messenger from far-off Llorens arrived in Naggarond. His name was Hrothar the Windlord, and he bore news that roused the Witch King from contemplation. when Malekith's wife, Allisara, had fled him so many centuries before, she had eventually found her way to Llorens. Within its timeless bounds, she built a new life, but slowly came to regret her abandonment. Though the Wood Elves were isolated from much of what had passed in Ulthuan and Nagaroth, little by little, Allisara had learned that her visions had indeed come true. She was now consumed with guilt and grief, Hrothgar said, and would return to Malekith's side if he so wished it. This news awoke a glimmer of warmth in Malekith's cold heart. Thus, when Hrothgar returned to Llorens, he did so to arrange Allisara's return. The elves of Llorens, who had by now come to accept Allisara as one of their own, pledged an escort of many hundreds of warriors in order that she be brought safe to Nagaroth. Malekith tried to keep Allisara's return from his mother's spies, but laboured in vain. The hag sorceress swore that Allisara would never reach the shores of Nagaroth, for her presence would only serve to further weaken Malekith's ebbing resolve. Yet, even Morathi dared not flout her son's wishes openly, and thus she set in motion other plans. Travelling to Ulthuan in disguise, she englamoured Prince Valador, a warrior whose life had been shredded by the intrigues at Aethys's court. Driven mad by disgrace, Valador was easily led to believe that Allisara's escort was provided by a forgotten elven nation that had thrown in its lot with the Dark Elves. Thus did Valador's army bring Allisara's escort to battle upon the shores of Bretonnia. Many elves died that day, and not one of them truly knew the cause for which they fought. Allisara was the last to perish in that battle, run through by Valador's spear. As her lifeblood touched the prince's hands, the madness finally fell from his eyes. Haunted by despair, Valador cast himself from the bluff into the churning waters below. The Witch King renewed. It was weeks before any in Nagaroth learned of Allisara's fate, and longer still before the news reached Malekith, for none had the courage to lay it before him. In the end, it was Morathi, her jubilation hidden carefully beneath an icy mask, who spoke of Allisara's fate. The hag sorceress watched with delight as the last spark of warmth in her son's heart died forever, and his growing rage burnt away the cloak of apathy that had hung so heavy about his shoulders. By dusk, Malekith had convened a council of war. By midnight, 8 of the council were dead, and the rest in fear of their lives. It transpired that many of the Nagarothi lords had believed that Malekith's lethargy heralded an opportunity for a new ruler to ascend. Thus, they had squandered their strength and that of their armies against one another. The Witch King's retribution was swift and uncompromising. Noble houses were wiped out overnight, their sons and daughters slain by assassins. Those who survived knew full well that they did so only at the Witch King's command, and hurriedly set about rebuilding his armies. Lacking the forces to attempt a new invasion, Malekith knew that the time had arrived to unleash his agents. There would not be a better moment to strike, for Phoenix King Aethys was a weak-willed estate with little thought to spare for his nation's security. As Aethys's reign progressed, the arts rose in prominence, and under the cover of this societal change, Malekith's cults expanded swiftly and struck without warning. Nobles were found slain in their beds, mages disappeared from their towers, and children vanished by the score. Panic swept through Ulthuan as the crimes grew in boldness and horror. Although Malekith's infiltrators were wreaking havoc, they were not unopposed. When Belcorhadris had built the White Tower of Hoeth, he had founded a company of mystical guardians to protect it, the Swordmasters. Unknown to the Phoenix King or to Malekith, the Swordmasters were waging a silent war against the pleasure cults. The conflict came to a climax in Lothern itself, when fighting between Naggarothi agents and the Swordmasters spilled onto the streets of the city. Forced to abandon some of their bolder plans by the Swordmasters' relentless persecution, the cults of excess faded back into High Elf society and continued their work in secret. Even as cultists were uncovered and executed, more agents were dispatched from Naggaroth to swell the ranks of the cults that remained, or even found new ones. This infiltration reached fruition when one of Malekith's most trusted agents, Girathon, acquired the position of Chancellor to the Phoenix King, from where he subverted many of Aethys's commands. By the time Girathon's deception was uncovered, it was too late. The Phoenix King was dead. Acting on Malekith's orders, Girathon had choked the life from Aethys with one of the golden silk scarves the monarch had so adored. Soon after Aethys's passing, the Witch King finally discovered Morathi's role in Allisara's death. Consumed by rage, he commanded that she be imprisoned in the deepest of dungeons. For nearly a year, Morathi languished as Malekith contemplated her fate. Finally, she was forced to kneel before the Witch King's throne, wretched but unrepentant. For a long moment, Malekith watched his mother in silence, but he then spoke in measured tones. She would see no further punishment for her deeds, the Witch King decreed, for he now saw that Allisara's death had only made him stronger. He would grant forgiveness this once, he said, but he also counseled his mother that he would not tolerate a second attempt to meddle with his destiny. It was well for the hag sorceress that the Witch King did not glimpse her face as she stalked from his throne room, for her knowing smile could only have made him doubt the wisdom of his clemency. The Day of Blood. With the passing of Aethys, rule of Ulthuan passed to Morvale, who would be known to history as the Impetuous. Outraged by the actions of Malekith's agents, Morvale hastily gathered a war fleet and sent it to Naggaroth to exact revenge for Aethys's murder. However, the sorceresses of Grond foresaw the invasion and sent warnings south to Naggarond. By now, the Witch King's armies were returned to full splendor, and he led them against the High Elf host, even as it landed at Arnheim. Outnumbered and ill-prepared, the High Elves were slaughtered. As the survivors fled eastward, on waters turned crimson by the blood of their fallen comrades, the Witch King drew plans for a new invasion of Ulthuan. The Age of Hateful Peace was ended. The Age of Blood was about to begin. The fate of the body. When a dark elf dies, his fellows seldom care for the empty shell he leaves behind. Weakness is despised in Naggaroth, and it is a rare individual whose death cannot be attributed in some way to a frailty of body or paucity of resolve. Of course, there are exceptions. For all the Dark Elves' callous and hard-bitten ways, bonds of genuine friendship and admiration do exist in Naggaroth, though the latter is often a wary acceptance of a rival's ability. Such bonds are carefully concealed lest they be seen as weakness. They nevertheless ensure that some individuals are thought well enough of to earn eternal repose in an obsidian sepulchre, rather than suffer a brief and bloody tenure as fodder for harpies and cold ones. Even bitter rivals may be accorded this honour. Nothing reinforces a dark elf's sense of superiority and security quite so much as knowing not only that his enemy is perished, but also where the body is buried, should he wish to view it. Even the Witch King is not immune to the lure of such reassurance. Thus is the concourse approaching the Black Tower, lined with mausolea, containing the mouldering remains of those dreadlords who thought to take Malekith's throne for themselves.